Thank you for being here at this fourth session of our pre-Congress seminar in order to hopefully encourage all of you to participate next year in the International Congress of Mamuts and Relatives, in the 9th International Congress of Mamuts and Relatives that will be hosted in Mexico City. Eduardo Corona and myself, Joaquín Arroyo, welcome you to this Seminario Relaciones, Hombre-Fauna, and today we have very important participant, in fact very special, because in fact he was a host of the 8th International Conference of Mammoths and their relatives in India 3 years ago. Dr. Raman Sukumar, he is National Science Chair at the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore. He's internationally known for his pioneering research on the ecology, behavior, and conservation of Asian elephants. His work has covered topics as varied as elephant-human interactions, reproductive biology, molecular genetics, evolutionary history, population dynamics, landscape ecology, movement ecology, and the cultural history of the elephants. His research interests also extend to tropical forest ecology and climate change. He has also contributed extensively to Indian government policy on wildlife conservation. He was, in fact, one of the architects of the country's flagship conservation initiatives, namely Project Elephant, launched in 1992. He was chair of the IUCN SSC Asian Elephant Specialist Group during 1997-2004. Over the past decade, he has been a member of the National Board for Wildlife, the apex conservation body in the country. He is author of 4 books on the elephants and over 200 scientific papers. He's also recipient of several national and international awards, the most notable being the International Cosmos Prize from Japan in 2006. He's a fellow of the 3 major science academies in India and the World Academy of Sciences. He also contributed for 3 decades to the work of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that shared the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. And recently he was elected the chair of this same International Panel Bureau, where he will serve on the UN body until 2030. So before starting, we certainly want to thank you, all of you, for being here, and also we would like to thank you all those that made our presentation possible. We have the Coordinación Nacional de Antropología, who very kindly has been supporting our work, especially the Subdirección de Tecnologías de la Información, including Salvador Cristóbal Jesús Portilla Martínez, Luis Olaf Ortega Olmos, and Juan Carlos Carrillo Arevalo, who made possible the transmission through the YouTube channel of the SENAN. Also, we acknowledge our institution, Centro INAH Morelos, from Eduardo, and Subdirección de Laboratorios and Apoyo Académico for myself, for helping us in providing the possibilities of sending these talks. So without any further delay, I leave the place for Raman Sukumar for talking now about the Asian elephant in the Anthropocene, a quite interesting topic, since we all know how important it's been considering this Anthropocene. Thank you, Raman, and yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. And I'm really looking forward to coming to Mexico next year for the main conference, the Mammoths and their Relatives Conference. But in the meanwhile, you'll have to hear me online. I was asked to provide an update on the Asian elephant, its status and the conservation challenges. And that's what I will do. So this talk will be a fairly general talk. I'm not going to make it very technical. It's going to be a fairly general talk. And the first slide here, the kind of typifies, you see this elephant, which is a wild elephant, by the way. It is not a captive elephant, it's a wild elephant, a tuskless male elephant. In must, what we call a must, it's like the rutting, in the deer. It's ransacking a bus. and all the passengers you can see have got down and are standing at a safe distance. This is the direction in which the interaction between Asian elephants and humans in Asia is actually heading. This is a scenario that's been building up during the Anthropocene for many, many years. And we will see more such scenes and what we call negative interactions between elephants and people, which will pose a major challenge to the conservation of the species. Now, when we think of Asian elephants, most people think that the Asian elephant is a creature of the forest, the rich and diverse tropical forests of Asia. And they are right, in one sense, because a very large proportion of the Asian elephant population is actually found in forested areas. They are found in rainforest, tropical moist forest, or they are also found in tropical dry forest. But, not many people realize that the Asian elephant is also a creature of the grassland. They are found in grasslands in Northeast India, in the floodplains of major rivers. They are found in grasslands like you can see here in Sri Lanka. And if you actually look at the morphology, the dental morphology of the Asian elephant is very highly adapted to a grazing diet. And therefore, it's not surprising that whenever grasslands are available, they come into grasslands to socialize and to feed and, derive a fairly large proportion of their diet from grasses. This also takes them, unfortunately, into the crop fields, into the agricultural crop fields. And scenes like this, elephants feeding on paddy crop or, passing through villages and human settlements are actually becoming extremely common. And as I said earlier, this will be one of the major challenges that all Asian countries face in the management of the species and in the conservation of the species. I'm going to give you an overview of where elephants are found in Asia, what are the population sizes, and what are the challenges that the species is facing in the various range states. Asian elephants in the wild are found in 13 range countries in Asia, across Asia, in South Asia as well as Southeast Asia. And the present-day habitat of the elephants covers 500,000 square kilometers, 500,000 or 500,000 square kilometers. And the population of the Asian elephant is about 50,000 animals in the wild. We also have about 15,000 elephants in captivity, which is a significant population. And ever since, I've been following Asian elephants from the early 1980s. This figure of 50,000 Asian elephants in the wild has remained fairly constant. But the numbers have not declined over the past 40 or 45 years, which you can perhaps, you may think that this is conservation success. But actually what has happened in the last 40 years is that Asian elephants have declined substantially in Southeast Asia, especially in the Indochina region, from Myanmar to Thailand to Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam, while the Asian elephant populations have increased in South Asia, especially in India and Sri Lanka. And these two countries, India has about 29 or 30,000 elephants, and Sri Lanka has at least 6,000 elephants. They hold about 70% of the Asian elephant population. And therefore, what has declined in Southeast Asia has been made up by the increase in elephant population in South Asia. So there's been a balancing of sorts, and therefore the numbers have fortunately remained constant. But obviously, we need to do something about stemming the decline of the elephant in Southeast Asia. This is the latest figures released by the IUCN Asian Elephant Specialist Group and by the chair of the specialist group and his co-author in 2019. I don't want you to necessarily go through every single number, but you'll see that South Asia has these two very large populations. The first is India with close to 30,000 elephants, and the second is Sri Lanka with about 6,000 elephants, and also Bhutan with several hundred elephants. So South Asia in total holds about 75% of the Asian elephant population, and the remaining 25% is found in Southeast Asia. And here, The largest numbers are in Myanmar, in Thailand, and in Malaysia. These are the three countries that hold still substantial numbers. You'll also see on the right side that you have about 15,000 Asian elephants in captivity, especially in India, in Myanmar, and Thailand. And therefore, when we talk about Asian elephant conservation and management, we also need to take into consideration the welfare of the captive elephant population, because they constitute 25% of the total numbers of Asian elephants left today. But the captive elephants are not going to be the subject of my talk today. I'll largely be updating you about the fortunes of the elephant in the various range states, the 13 countries, and then go on to talk about what the major challenges today are in their management. Now, the last major population estimation in India was done in the year 2017. And you will see here that elephants are found in 4 different regions in the country. Northern India, Northeast India, Central India, and Southern India. Now, I don't want you to necessarily read all these small numbers on your left, the table in the left, but you will notice that Southern India with about 12,000 elephants and Northeast India with about 10,000 elephants. These are the 2 major populations in the country. And the numbers are smaller in Northern India and Central India. And Central India especially faces major challenges of elephant-human conflicts because of the dispersal of elephants from their native habitat. The elephants are now been spreading over a much, much larger area. And this is something that I will describe later. But Southern India, with about 12,000 elephants, and the least fragmented forests for holding these elephants, this region offers the best hope for the long-term conservation of the species. Now, for every country, I'm going to give you the positives and the negatives. The positives for India are that we have many conservation areas that have already been set up. Project Elephant was mentioned. Project Elephant started more than 3 decades ago, under which a large number of elephant reserves, at scales of landscapes have been set up across the country. And these hold a very large number or a large proportion of the elephant population, where they have hopefully, a good prospects for survival, especially the elephant reserves in the south. We have an increasing elephant population in India. And from the time I have been studying elephants since 1980, the population in the country has doubled from about 15,000 in the wild to about 30,000 in the wild, which also brings its own challenges and problems in terms of interactions with people. Fortunately, the ivory poaching has been controlled. During the 80s and the 90s, when I was actually, did my early studies on the elephant, ivory poaching was a major problem. Ivory poaching, if you recall, was also a major issue in Africa, where very large numbers of African elephants were being slaughtered, and the ivory was going to the Middle East. They were going to some of the East Asian countries. And India too got caught up in the ivory poaching. But fortunately, in the last 20 to 25 years, ivory poaching has declined very sharply. I would say it's almost close to 0 today. The negatives, on the other hand, are region-specific. We still continue to have fragmentation of habitat in the Northeast, loss of forest and fragmentation of habitat. In the South, we have the spread of an invasive plant, and I'll mention this later in my talk. And this has choked the understory of many of our forest areas and reduced the resources, the grass fodder for the forage for the elephants. We also have in Central India the phenomena of dispersal of elephants from their original range into new areas where elephants have not been found over the past 300 or 400 years. And this has been accompanied with conflicts with people. And of course, we have the major challenge across the country today with the increase in elephant population and human population, that we have chronic conflicts between elephants and agriculture, and people and elephants both get killed in the process. And this is also a problem across most other Asian countries. Nepal and Bhutan have relatively smaller populations. The positives here are that, and these populations they share a border with India. And in many cases, the elephants actually move between India and Nepal or between India and Bhutan. The positives are that although the elephant population in Nepal is very small, maybe 100 to 200 individuals, the population is stable over the past 20 or 30 years, in spite of losing a lot of habitat. Bhutan, on the other hand, has probably witnessed an increase in the elephant population because of partly of deforestation on the Indian side. And the elephant population of Bhutan is a few hundred individuals. And the population is shared between Bhutan and India. But the negatives, on the other hand, are that you have very small population sizes that are scattered. There's still habitat fragmentation, especially in Nepal. And only transboundary reserves between India and Nepal or between Bhutan and India can help maintain the viability of these populations. So that's the update that I have for Nepal and Bhutan. Bangladesh elephants face a very, very sorry plight. Positives, I'm not really able to say what the positives are over the past 30 or 40 years. You know, it's largely been the negatives. We have less than 200 elephants left in scattered populations in the north, as well as in the southeast, in the Chittagong Hills. The situation in the Chittagong Hills has exacerbated because of some of you may have read about the Rohingya refugee crisis, where because of almost a civil war in the neighboring country of Myanmar or Burma, millions of people in the Rakhine Yoma range have been displaced, and in the process they have fled Myanmar and they have come into countries like Bangladesh and India, mostly Bangladesh. And in Bangladesh, where they have been settled in the remaining forested areas because that's where the place is available for them. Bangladesh is a country that has grown economically very rapidly. It's a very densely populated country, and therefore there's very little natural habitat left. And therefore, when you have 1 million or 2 million refugees who come in from the neighboring Myanmar, the only place left for the refugees to be settled is the forested areas in the Chittagong Hill Tract. And you can see this photograph on the top, the kind of dismal conditions under which refugees are settled. And these are areas which are originally there were elephants in this area. And therefore, you have had conflict. Sometimes people get killed in the process. So the situation in Bangladesh is very, very bleak for the continued survival of the elephant because of a multiplicity of factors. Not all of them because that Bangladesh is to blame, but because of problems in the neighboring Myanmar. Sri Lanka is an island country, as you know. The positives are that the population is growing and it's about 6,000. 30 or 40 years ago, we used to hear of a population of about 3,000 elephants, but today have a much larger population. And I think one of the big positives is that Sri Lanka, the elephant population is still, in genetic terms, a single population across the country. In the 40 or 50 years ago, there were papers suggesting that the elephant population of Sri Lanka had already been fragmented. But then over decades and of several visits in Sri Lanka and the work of local scientists like Prithviraj Fernando have actually shown that the elephant population of the country is actually a single population genetically. Although there are still challenges, there are still fragmentation, there's still expansion of agriculture and human settlement. And thereby, you have a major escalation in elephant-human conflict. In fact, the real challenge that Sri Lanka faces today is that with a population of 6,000 elephants, you have 120 people getting killed by wild elephants each year. That's quite a substantial number. And elephant deaths too have increased over time. And about 200 elephants die each year, in conflicts or they die because of unnatural reasons. And this is an aspect that I will come to a little later in the talk. Myanmar, a neighboring country to South Asia, the positives are that several protected areas have been established. And Myanmar still has a large stock of captive elephants, which also have a negative side to it because this also implies that a lot of elephants have been captured in the country. In India, you have 10% of the population in captivity and 90% of our population is in the wild. In Myanmar, it is something like 60 to 70% of the elephant population is in captivity, and only about 30% of the population is in the wild. And Myanmar has witnessed a sharp decline in wild elephant population from several thousand in the 1980s to about 1,500 to 2,000 today. And you will see the map here that they are in scattered populations. Also, illegal killing of elephants for elephant parts, for meat and skin especially, in elephant and elephant parts still continues in Myanmar. And this is something I'll highlight a little bit later down in the talk. Thailand has set up a large number of protected areas in which elephants are found. But here again, the habitats or the landscapes are fragmented across the country. And elephant-human conflicts are also quite frequent. And too many elephants have been captured in Thailand. And Thailand has roughly equal numbers of elephants in captivity and in the wild. And the elephants had been captured for the logging industry, but the logging was banned somewhere in the 1990s. And therefore, these elephants are without work, and they played a role in tourism, unfortunately. So it's been very difficult to maintain these elephants in captivity. A number of conservation measures have been taken. Conservation centers or sanctuaries have been set up for the elephants in captivity. But as you know, the real role of an elephant is, as a keystone species in the natural habitat or in the tropical forests. And therefore, it's not very desirable to take too many elephants into captivity. But at least Thailand seems to be approaching a steady state population in recent years. Cambodia, the positive is that 40% of the country is designated as a natural resource conservation area. But the negative is that for a relatively large country such as Cambodia, only less than 500 elephants are believed to survive and scattered. And illegal trade and hunting still continues across. Cambodia has gone through a lot of political problems and issues. You had the legacy of the war in neighboring Vietnam. You had the legacy of the Khmer Rouge and, the purging of the civilian population. So all of this has contributed to the decline of the elephant and, the natural biodiversity of this country. But hopefully, now that peace has returned to the country, that they will begin the process of rebuilding not only the elephant population, but the other mammal species and the biodiversity as a whole in this country. Laos, I'm not able to find any positive. In the last few decades, the population of elephants is highly scattered. We believed a few decades ago there were a few thousand elephants, but now it's estimated only 300 to 500 elephants are surviving in this country. And therefore, the prospects seem quite bleak. I'm sure that the elephant will continue to survive in Laos. It's a very poor country, but the country will grow in economic terms in the coming decades. And therefore, the habitats might further shrink for the elephants in Laos. Vietnam typifies the very, very sad plight of the elephant across Asia. There were a few thousand elephants, several decades ago. Today, there are less than 100 elephants, highly, highly scattered in very, very small populations. 10 elephants, 15 elephants, 20 elephants. And this is what I call the sad legacy of the Vietnam War, which was thrust upon the country by the big powers. In the process, people were displaced. People had to take refuge in the forest areas. The forested areas were bombed and they are defoliated using herbicides, chemical herbicides. And in the process, elephants suffered because people had to eat elephants to survive. And the nature of the forest completely altered in this country. And it's going to take a very long time for Vietnam to rebuild its elephant population. China, you must have heard about the wandering elephants of China. They're all very peacefully sleeping. But a herd of elephants of about 20 to 25 elephants left its original range in Zhejiang in Yunnan province in the south. Elephants are only found in the Yunnan province, and less than 300 elephants are found here. And this range expansion was caused by climate change. There's a very interesting scientific paper suggesting that the range expansion was triggered by climate change, which has also happened in India, by the way. And, so the elephant is confined only to the Yunnan province. But there are very positive signs recently that China has taken the protection and conservation of elephants seriously, with the result that they may be able to protect the remaining areas. Peninsular Malaysia has managed to maintain a stable population or even an increasing population, even though a very large proportion of the country has been deforested for rubber plantation and for oil palm in recent decades. However, the threat of habitat fragmentation continues in the country. But the population of elephants still is perhaps about 1,500 to 2,000 elephants in Peninsular Malaysia. And that brings hope that the elephant will continue to survive in this country. Along with Sabah, where you have about 1,000 elephants, Sabah is also part of Malaysia. The origin of the elephants is still a bit of a mystery, whether elephants were isolated during the Pleistocene and reduced to very, very small numbers from which they have expanded, or whether elephants were introduced to the island during the 18th century by the Sultan of Sulu. The evidence, certain lines of evidence seems to suggest that the elephants are native to Sabah or Borneo, while historical records seem to suggest that elephants have been introduced. I'll not get into this debate in this talk, but only tell you that the elephants of Sabah or Borneo are derived from a very, very small number of individuals, almost certainly less than 10 individuals. They are very highly inbred. They have a very, very low levels of genetic variation and still have survived and still have expanded to 1,000 individuals. It is remarkable, which makes us rethink our notions about the importance of genetic variation. I'm not dismissing the need for genetic variation in maintaining populations of large mammals, but just to tell you that the elephant population of Sabah, Borneo, is derived from a very, very small number and has grown to 1,000 elephants. They are now being listed as endangered on the IUCN Red List by a recent exercise carried out by the Asian Elephant Specialist Group, but continues to face pressures from habitat loss and fragmentation from the spread of oil palm plantations, in this area, unfortunately. So the population is under pressure today. Indonesia, in Sumatra, is again has seen a very, very sharp decline because of deforestation and expansion of oil palm. Central Indonesia has lost almost all its forest. Very, very small numbers of elephants are remaining. Unlike in neighboring Malaysia, where they have managed to stabilize the population, Indonesia has probably lost about 75% of its elephants in the last few decades. And elephants are found in the north, in the province of Aceh, where we had the big tsunami in 2004, which killed a very large number of people. But perhaps a few hundred elephants are found in Aceh province in the north, as well as in the south in the province of Lampung. But elsewhere, the populations are almost disappeared in Indonesia. Okay, now I will switch over to the main conservation challenges facing the Asian elephant in the Anthropocene. I've already referred to habitat loss and fragmentation, which I think will continue with economic growth in Asian range states. And therefore, it's going to be an uphill task in several countries which are growing economically. India, for instance, is one of the major economic in terms of GDP. It's one of the 5th largest economies in the world, and it is the major is among the major economies the fastest growing today in the last few years, in the last 10, among the 10 major economies in the world. Presumably, many of the other countries will continue to grow. Sri Lanka will witness economic growth. So will Southeast Asia in the coming decades. And therefore, there will be major challenges in maintaining sufficient habitat for elephants. So not just the habitat per se, it's the developmental processes, especially linear infrastructure, like roads, that has the potential to fragment the habitat and isolate the populations, and so on. I will not talk about the habitat loss and fragmentation, but I want to refer to the continued poaching for ivory, meat, and other products. As I told you, in South Asia, the levels of poaching have come down substantially in the last 20 or 25 years. But certain other countries continue to witness the poaching for meat and other products, and possibly for ivory too. Now, even in South Asia, especially in southern India, as you know, the female Asian elephants do not carry tusks, and therefore they are not poached, unlike the African female elephants. On the other hand, male Asian elephants, they can carry tusks and have been the target of ivory poaching. In the 1980s and 90s, I had made an estimate that in India, in South India, 100 to 150 male elephants were being poached for ivory each year. And the male-female ratio had skewed, had become very, very unequal over time. And we started seeing tuskless males in the population. You also have a different phenotype, the tuskless males, what we call the makhanas in this country. So the frequency of the makhanas have started increasing in the population because of the elimination of the tusked males. And today, from a proportion of about 5% of the population in, let's say in 1980 or so, the tuskless males have increased to about 20% of the population today. So that is one of the genetic consequences of the elimination of the tusked males in Asian elephant populations. But the bigger threat to elephants comes from continued elephant poaching, illegal trade in Indochina, especially in Laos, Cambodia, and Myanmar. And there have been a lot of news items coming in about a disturbing new trend that poachers are killing Myanmar's elephants, not necessarily only for ivory, but the skin, teeth, and even the tail hair. And these are products that are probably going into countries like China for consumption there. And poaching has actually decimated or has sharply reduced the elephant population of these countries. So continued poaching for elephant products is the major threat to the elephants of Indochina. In the Anthropocene, I showed you a picture right up front of a male elephant, a bull elephant, a wild elephant coming and ransacking a bus. It's looking for food. Put its trunk into through the window of the bus. It's taking out. People may be carrying some food, it might be fruits or vegetables. They have purchased that at the local market and they're taking it to their villages in the bus. And the elephant is trying to pull that out, or maybe even cooked food. Now here you see this elephant, and again a tuskless male in Northeast India. It has come into a town. It's almost unimaginable in North America that you will get a 5-ton large mammal come on a picnic, as it were, into the second largest city in the state of West Bengal. So this is a shopping mall, and people are now watching from the shopping mall. In the foreground, you see sacks of vegetables, potatoes, and so on that are being, abandoned and probably being carried to the local markets. The elephant has come in and it's kind of playing football with the motorcycles and the cycles that have been parked there. And the most amazing thing of this scene was that the elephant was sent back to the forest. It did not injure a single human, and it went back to a forest. But as I told you, this does not always happen. And more than 600 people are killed each year in India alone, by wild elephants. When I was doing my doctoral research in the early 1980s, the number was about 125. And therefore, the conflicts between elephants and humans have increased at least 5-fold in the last 40-odd years. Crop depredation is very widespread across Asia, and millions of dollars worth crop is being damaged every year. And to show you, to give you some actual figures from Sri Lanka, you can see the number of human deaths has been increasing from 1991 up to 2021. From about 40 to 120 years. It has tripled in about 30 years' time. While the number of elephant deaths, has perhaps even gone steeper than that because of the sharp increase in unnatural deaths. Elephants are electrocuted, they suffer of a shock, they are poisoned to death, and so on and so forth. Even though farmers in South Asia are relatively very, very tolerant towards elephants because elephants are considered sacred. Now, when I talk about elephant-human conflicts, you must realize that elephant-human conflict is ancient. From ancient texts and from sculptures, we know that conflict is at least 2000 years old. So this is from the 1st century CE. This is from Central Asia. You see a sculpted, this is from an ancient temple in which you have elephants and you have people, a group of people who seem to be confronting or chasing a herd of wild elephants 2000 years ago. So conflict has always been there. But today conflict has taken a very, very different turn. And it's very, very intense, both for elephants as well as for humans. Now, conflict, the causes for conflict is very often reduced to a few cliches, habitat loss, fragmentation, and human population increase, and so on and so forth. All these are obviously, there's a grain of truth to this. When you have habitat loss or fragmentation of habitat, you do have an increase in elephant-human conflict. But conflict is, the underlying causes of conflict are much more complex. It's a suite of different factors, which are very often region-specific, that result in elephants coming into the human-dominated areas and coming into conflict with agriculture and killing people. So you do have habitat loss, fragmentation, and degradation. But you also have land use changes and patterns. So areas which are outside the forest areas have become much more attractive today because of irrigation, the better water facilities available to the farmers. So they're able to grow crops almost around the year. You have adverse climatic events. I'll refer to climate change, which I'll again come to. Climate variability is causing the elephants to go out to the forest areas. And you have elephant increase and you have a human population increase. So the increase in human and elephant population simply means that just by chance alone, the rate of interaction between elephants and people have increased. But as a biologist, you also need to understand that there are intrinsic biological factors. That elephants seek crops because crops are more abundant, they are more palatable, and they are more nutritious. You have other behavioral ecological factors, like the male elephants willing to take risks and come out and raid crops. And you have a complex process of learning because the elephant is a highly intelligent creature. And you have learning processes within elephant society, both among males as well as among family groups, which perpetuates conflicts. And I'll refer to some of this. So you have habitat loss. I mentioned about the replacement of forest with oil palm in countries like Malaysia and Indonesia, very rapid. So they have natural rainforest. And therefore, elephants now like oil palm because the family the palms are food for elephants too. So they come and park themselves also within the oil palm plantation and they damage the oil palm trees. So there is conflict because of that. In India, there is a lot of mining for iron ore. And this has ravaged the habitat. And therefore, elephants don't have forage. And therefore, they are forced to go outside the forest areas. And you see scars like this in the forested areas. This is a satellite imagery showing you the ravages that mining has caused. And this has caused the elephants to go out to the forest areas and disperse from these forest areas. I mentioned about an invasive plant. This invasive plant has come from Latin America. It's a plant called Lantana camara. It is native to your region, the Central American, Mexico, Central America, and so on. It was brought as an ornamental plant to India 200 years ago. In Central America, it is probably the population is kept under control because you have natural pests and predators. But when it comes to a novel environment like South Asia, it does not have any predators. And therefore, the populations have exploded. And it has choked the understory of the forest. It is one of the 10 most invasive plants in the world today. You find it in Hawaii, you find it in Australia, you find it in South Africa. And this plant is completely has choked the growth of grasses, which the elephants prefer. This means that the forage, the grasses which are preferred plants by the elephants have declined, and the elephants are forced to go out of the forest to feed, and they come into conflict. But at the same time, the elephants are attracted towards the crops because they are able to get a much larger amount of feed, larger amount of crops per unit time. The food crops are very abundant. They're high in quality because they have very low levels of tannins and secondary chemicals, and so on and so forth, which the elephants don't like. And the elephants, and this is something that I've been saying for the more than 40 years, that crops are more nutritious. They provide higher amounts of protein and minerals like sodium and calcium. And therefore, many elephants in the population will prefer these crops. They are willing to take risks, in higher amount of risks in going out and feeding on crops. And especially the male elephants. They have greater stakes in achieving reproductive success because of the higher variation in reproductive success among males than among females in a polygynous species like large mammals like the elephant. In elephants, a male can grow large in body size and express must, in which you have a secretion from the temporal gland, where the male gains, a dominance over other males. There is a female choice for males in must, and they have a better chance of mating. So these male elephants are willing to take much greater risks, and therefore the male elephants are at higher level. They have a greater propensity to come out and raid crops. They have a 5-fold greater propensity than the female elephants to come out and raid crops and come into conflict with agriculture. And as I told you, they will give them a better chance of coming into must than the female elephants being attracted towards them and achieving higher reproductive success. So there are interesting biological factors that we need to take into account when we come up with plans for managing these populations to avoid conflicts. Dietary choice also influences social organization, because male elephants are normally solitary when they move into the forest. But when they come out into the human-dominated areas, into the agricultural areas, they start forming coalitions. They start forming bull groups. Now, these bull groups consist of what I call it's a learning process. You have a young male, you have a middle-aged male, and you have the old male. Or it's like a classroom where you have the professor, the postdoctoral fellow, and you have the student. Okay, they're learning from each other. Student here, the professor is admonishing the student here, and the postdoctoral fellow is in the foreground. So they all play a role. There is a big classroom in which they're learning from each other. The student has to go through this apprenticeship, of learning, because then it will better be able to tackle the hostile farmers and be able to get the crops and grow large in body size. So very, very interesting phenomena that's happening today. And these are things that I never saw 40 years ago. This is very close to my city of Bangalore. You can see the background coconut fields. You have an all-male group of 12 elephants. So they're coming up with novel behavior social organizations. They're forming larger male groups. And what do these male groups do? During the daytime, they take a refuge in the water because the villagers can't come and chase them. They can't come and chase them. And after sunset, they go out into the agricultural fields and they raid the crops. And during sunrise, they come and take refuge in the water, into the water body. Elephants are excellent swimmers. So there is novel adaptation measures. So the Anthropocene, elephants are adapting to the Anthropocene. They're showing traits that help them to overcome land use change. The human population increases and all of that. So this is proving to be a very, very big challenge in trying to solve elephant-human conflicts. And this increased amount of crops is also making them, less prone to stress, physiological stress. In fact, if you look at these two elephants, you will think that the elephant on top is starved because it is outside the forest area. But actually, it's not true, because the elephant on the top right is inside a national park. The elephant below is an elephant which is outside the national park, where it has access to agricultural crops for feeding. It has lower levels of glucocorticoid hormones, the stress hormone. So there is a great deal of adaptation that is happening. The elephants coming out of daily crops, getting high levels of protein. In spite of being chased by farmers, injured by farmers, they have lower levels of stress hormones, the glucocorticoids, and they're able to adapt. Unless, of course, the stress levels are extremely high. I spoke about climate change, stress, dispersal, and conflict. I first witnessed this 40 years ago, during 1982, 83, when I was doing my doctoral research. When I heard of elephants, a whole clan of 50 elephants. 1982, I'm sure that people in Mexico, you'll remember, was one of the worst droughts of the 20th century, because you had the phenomenon of El Nino, which caused a major drought in Mexico, in South Africa, and in India. And you had the dispersal of a whole clan of elephants. And, so climate change is now causing the dispersal of elephants. And in the future, this will continue to happen. So, okay, many people have tried various means to try to prevent the elephants from crossing over, like putting trenches like this, but the elephants can do circus feats and they cross over. They can use, they have a good knowledge of physics. You put an electric fence, the elephant learns that the soles of the feet are poor conductors, or the tusks are poor conductors, and they're able to cross over. So the elephant is more than a match for our technological advancement. Elephants are also adapted to feeding on the garbage dumps around the villages and the towns and so on and so forth for the tidbits. And today they come and successfully cross major highways like this. Therefore, all these are proving to be major challenges to the conservation and management of the elephant during the Anthropocene. And, it doesn't help that we have expansion of railways, and sometimes elephants die because they're hit by trains. And about 15 elephants die each year in the country because of this. So what is the solution? The radio collaring studies using GPS collaring has shown that, at least in countries like India, elephants move over an area of about 1,000 square kilometers. And that's the scale, the landscape scale at which we should plan for the conservation of species of the elephant. And when I talk about landscape scale conservation, this is not very easy, but that's you need to have a mosaic of protected areas and multiple land use areas where you have to incorporate, settlements, agriculture, and still plan for the conservation of the species. So more than 30 years ago, I had the privilege of being part of a task force that helped design these landscapes in southern India. We designed 4 such landscapes in southern India for the long-term conservation of the elephant. And today I can tell you that the southern India has the best prospects for the long-term conservation of the species. So in the Anthropocene, increasingly with large populations, with very little natural habitat left for the elephants, we need to innovate. We need to take the landscape approach, which is more pertinent than ever, rather than a purely protected area approach, to promote the coexistence of elephants and people and to contribute to the long-term survival of the Asian elephant. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sukumar. Quite interesting talks, and certainly one that I think for those that, as I am studying mammoths from Pleistocene, are quite important to learn some of the possible similar behaviors that mammoths could have in the past, certainly being one of the closest parent species from mammoth, well, being one of the closest group to the Mammurus. Elephants are an important animal. In fact, one of the questions I already have here that came through the talk is, and I know you are not necessarily a paleontologist, but last week, Pauline Mebet from Kenya, she mentioned that there's a fossil species in Africa, Elephas atabus, and she mentioned that could be similar to Elephas maximus. So have you heard anything about that?
No, I know that, you see, essentially elephants evolved in Africa, as you know, and then migrated to Asia probably 2 or 3 million years ago. So the origin of elephants is in Africa. But I do know that, when you look at the dental morphology, they share, more features with Loxodonta than with Elephas maximus. Because what's happened is that the degree of hypsodonty has, increased in Elephas maximus in the course of evolution. The number of plates have increased, and the number of lamellae per molar has increased in Elephas maximus. I don't think the African genus of Elephas had that many features that would indicate a diet of grass, a grazing diet. So I think it was more slightly more adapted to a browsing diet than to a grazing diet as compared to Elephas maximus. That's the best I know about the elephants from Africa. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question from Fernando Tamaris Herrera. Considering that elephants are one of the main attractors for tourists, what role do tourist and tourist departments have to play in Asian elephant conservation to ensure the survival of the species?
Yes. No, I think tourism has certainly played a role because I think setting up of the protected areas in many countries, in India certainly, in Sri Lanka, and so on, where you can actually go and see elephants in very large numbers, Asian elephants, are largely driven by tourism. A protected area is set up not necessarily only for tourism. It is set up for protecting a species, for conservation of the overall biological diversity and so on. But, typically a protected area becomes a hub for wildlife tourism. And therefore, it has certainly played a role in the conservation of the species. It has created a lot of awareness, education for large number of tourists who come to see elephants and tigers and a number of other creatures, in our areas. And today, if you really look at the most abundant elephant populations, they are found in national parks and sanctuaries, which actually are also the major tourism areas in Asia.
Okay, thank you very much. Another one. Well, you get congratulations from Fernando and also from Victor Manuel Bravo Cuevas. A couple of other questions. Is there any studies about these talkless elephants? What are the pressures for them to not develop tusk?
Right. Okay. When you look at elephant evolution, I think this is a topic on which a whole lecture can be given. And this is something that I've been trying to pursue. The tuskless trait is something which is very, very rare, originally in the evolution of elephants would have been quite rare. But I think a combination of natural selection, because of, to grow the tusks, you need to put in energy for the growth of tusks. And perhaps in the course of evolution, there were phases when, it was expensive to put that kind of energy into developing tusks. And therefore, there would have been selection against the development of tusks. So, but when you look at Asian elephant populations, the frequency of the females did not have tusks in Elephas maximus. The males, probably the tuskless male had a very, very small frequency. But we know that kings in India, the rulers and the kings, they captured elephants for use in the armies. And the favored phenotype was a tusked male for capture, and use in battle and in war. So in some parts of the country, like Northeast India, you have 50% of the males don't have tusks. Now in Southern India, what's happened is that gradually we have been chipping away by poaching the male elephant with tusks, thereby giving a selective advantage to the tuskless male to reproduce, reproduce better. And therefore, the frequency of the tuskless male is actually increasing.
It's increasing. Oh,
yeah, it's increasing. But right now, I'm trying to, do a search. We have a paper in Current Biology on where we have used whole genome sequencing of Asian elephants for the first time. That paper will come out very, very soon. But a parallel study with a group from Europe, we are trying to search for the genes for tusks that code for tusks in elephants. And hopefully in the coming months, we'll have something on that too. Yeah,
oh, wonderful. I have another question from a very good friend, a great colleague, Oscar Sanchez. How is the ASAM mobile phone app early alert program for approaching elephants herds doing?
Yeah, I think it's doing well in local areas, very localized areas, like tea plantations where you have a relatively small community. But I would be very skeptical of its application to very large areas. It's done very well in a part of southern India, but there are other areas where, and it has reduced the number of human deaths because people get the alert and then people avoid going into those areas where the elephants have been seen. But when elephants are actually moving over very large areas, and it's not so easy to use these alerts. So there are a lot of challenges with it. But it certainly plays a role in lowering the number of human deaths in very specific regions. Thank you.
Okay. In regard to that one, what is, I guess, the major predator for elephants are tigers, at least in India. But are there more deaths by tiger than elephants, human deaths?
It's very difficult to say because I don't think people have really quantified the data. See, among Asian elephants, it's only the calf or the juvenile that can be killed by a tiger.
Okay.
And not subadult or an adult. They are not prone to, attacks by tigers. So you really have to be maybe, under 4 feet or 5 feet in, elephants that are 2 or 3 years old at most, But elephants also have this wonderful, social organization by which the big females, they will protect the younger elephants from attacks by tigers and so on. I don't really think that there is very good data because when the calves die, they are very not discovered quite easily. But I wouldn't be able to put a number on that. But I do know that tigers can attack and do kill elephant calves.
Okay.
Thank you.
And this is my own question. You show a slide on the China statistics with many elephants lying on the floor. Were they dead?
No.
No,
okay. They were actually taking a nap, and they caught the world's attention because the media, got onto this because the elephants had come out of the forest and they were wandering a few 100 kilometers away from their natural habitat, and they were going towards a big city called Kunming, which is a city of several hundred people in southern China, in the province of Yunnan. And the world media was kind of following this elephant as they were wandering across the countryside. And I think at one point they decided to take a nap. So all these elephants kind of, they were lying down and they were taking a nap. So using a drone, they took a picture. So that picture became very, very iconic.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah,
well,
that's right.
I mentioned this because if you recall 3 or 4 years ago, there was supposed a mass death of many elephants in Zimbabwe. And certainly there's some studies that have not been finalized, but there's no still the final cause that caused that.
No, the final cause I think is pretty well, it's known now because I think, under certain kind of conditions of climatic conditions and water availability, there was a growth of a particular microbe that, some plants that let out toxins into the water. So these elephants died because they drank the water with a toxin, with some kind of a chemical toxin released by plants. Okay. So that was the reason for the death. Yeah, Yeah, these elephants were all alive and they were just sleeping, and very nice to take a shot of that.
Yes, I like it. Well, I see there's no any other question, so I guess we can wrap up here. Thank you very much, Dr. Sukumar, for this wonderful presentation that I'm sure will be heard many times in the broadcasting. And well, thank you to all our assistants to this presentation. You need to go back to our knowledge of people.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. And you bet I'll be in Mexico next year.
Okay, so we look forward to meet you here. And well, again, I thank you, the Coordinación Nacional de Antropología, and particularly the Subdirección de Tecnologías de Formación for the support for this presentation, also to the YouTube channel of the same coordination and to our centers of work. And thank you to all of the participants. I remind you that next week we will have another talk in that time with our European colleague Florent Rivals, who will be speaking on mammoths diets and how to study those. Well, thank you to all of you. Thank you again, Raman, Sukumar, for your kindness and to be away so late. Hope you have a good night, and thank you to all of you,
Thank you.
to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good.
Bye.
Good evening. Bye.
Gobierno de México.